the cloud. Right, okay. If you don't want to be recorded, switch your video off because it's going to be recorded. Okay, over to you then, Kofi.
Well, actually, I didn't understand that I was going to be chairing this. I was just going to make a contribution and then others will contribute and then we'll have, from what you've said, question and answer session and discussion. So, in terms of chairing, I will hand it over to you, Chris,
okay. So
that I'll be free of that concern. Yes, I'm glad that once again we are meeting like this to continue our radical anthropology sessions, and we had agreed that some of us from Extinction Rebellion will contribute topics that will begin conversations around how do we bring the rebellion perspective into engagement with academia. And it is in that sense that my proposed topic is actually in full our rebellion, decolonization of education towards a global academic commons. And what do I mean by that? As a Pan-African activist for global justice, coming from the Stop the Mangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide campaign based within African heritage communities, into Extinction Rebellion, and now functioning as one of the joint coordinators of the Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network, which I co-founded with people like Dr. Gail Bradbrook, Jamie Kelsey Fry, my colleague Esther Stanford Hosey, Faye Haslam, and others. It is important that our work on promoting, on organizing for and promoting a worldwide rebellion to address, as a matter of urgency, the climate and ecological crisis, also touches on issues of education and seeks, particularly from our Extinction Rebellion International Solidarity perspective, of giving priority attention to highlighting and amplifying the voices of resistance from the global south, particularly from indigenous communities of resistance, that this rebellion is made to address those aspects of rebellion that need to happen in institutions of education. And to do so, we have to highlight the challenges of decolonization. Decolonization is not a new thing. Ever since the conquistadores, set foot on what are now the colonized, territories of not just Africa and Asia, but also the whole of Abya Yala, that is the Caribbean and all of the so-called Americas. The response of the colonized peoples has been to reclaim power and to decolonize, that is to strip their societies of the contaminations of the toxin of coloniality. And up till today, that struggle continues as an intergenerational rebellion. And a key part of that is the challenge to reclaim and restore the knowledges of indigenous communities to their rightful place in the proper education of their own people, particularly the youth, to counteract miseducation, which manifests itself in attempts at menticide, which we understand within Pan-African lexicon as trying to kill the minds, the real minds of colonized peoples, so that they can be indoctrinated with the poison, the white supremacy racist poison, of Eurocentrism. And this is a continuing struggle to ensure that people can reclaim who they truly are, know who they truly are, and as who they truly are, contribute from their own knowledge perspectives, their own world viewpoints, to the production of knowledge, the sharing of knowledge, and to utilizing that knowledge for the betterment of themselves and of all humanity and of the entire world. And key to that, particularly with reference to the climate and ecological crisis, is that of ensuring that the knowledge that indigenous communities have been producing and utilizing to rationalize and maintain a harmonious, more ecologically sound relationship with Mother Earth, with the planet Earth. Those knowledges are reclaimed, defended, and utilized now more than ever before in addressing the climate and ecological crisis. As far as those of us who are coming from Global South organizations, networks, and movements of resistance are concerned, this demands that the decolonization of education, like all other spheres of decolonization, ought to be done in terms of, we can say, yes, nonviolent direct action that must manifest itself in disrupting, deposing, and also the transformation of existing harmful forms and ways of producing knowledge and utilizing knowledge and advancing knowledge. And a big part of that is to stop extractivism. That has become the mainstay of how establishment academia works. Thankfully, we have within establishment academia spaces like what the Radical Anthropology group has created, which seeks to ensure that a better relationship is created with communities across the world, and the knowledges that they are producing and the ways they seek to educate themselves in order to carry forward their best practices are continued. In doing this, we also have to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of institutions where groups like the Radical Anthropology group are located. With all the best of intentions and even with the best of what were the original intentions of creating institutions like UCL, they actually have become part and parcel of the Western establishment of extractivist plunder of resources, including knowledge and educational resources from all over the world, to enrich a privileged few and to promote the neoliberal system of exploitation of peoples across the world for the profit making of a few. And that is what fundamentally what we call establishment academia has become, both in the global north as well as in the global south, where there is a reproduction through colonization of these kinds of institutions. And when we talk about the way forward, we see that of promoting the knowledge production work of indigenous and other communities of resistance, particularly in the colonized parts of the world, to challenge this extractivist plunder of establishment academia and win recognition for the academia that exists within these indigenous communities, that exists at the grassroots of these communities, utilizing their own indigenous knowledges, their own languages, their own cultures, so that by reconnecting these grassroots academia with those spaces, like what RAG is trying to do in UCL, we can begin to reclaim the knowledge commons and connect and develop that into a global academic commons that makes knowledges in their pluriversality from all communities freely accessible to the entirety of humanity, without it becoming a commodity, without it being a privilege of a few. And this is what we mean by working towards the creation of a global academic commons that connects spaces of the progressive production of knowledge from all communities with inequality and the free sharing of knowledge to enrich human civilizational work. That is what we mean. Now, it's a huge challenge how this can be done. But from the work that some of us have done in the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe and the Stop the Mangamizi, which are genocide exercise campaign, with the Global Justice Forum, where we started actually connecting with progressive scholar activists in establishment academia and trying to forge a better relationship of equity between them and those scholar activists we know are the grassroots of communities of indigenous communities. We have been trying to forge forward and develop some practices. So out of those efforts, the People's Internationalist Forum for Inter-Community Lifelong Learning, or PIFICOL, has emerged. And we have carried this work into Extinction Rebellion through the XR International Solidarity Network. We are connecting with a wider range of communities like that of Osie Ajatepo, the 7th in Avatime, in addition to the relationship we have developed with the Evefon Ajak communities of the Beto, from which some of us come, with Akan communities, and connecting that into work along these lines that has been developing fantastically on the continent of Abiyala, right? Or the Americas, so-called, where many indigenous communities have been doing fantastic work and have produced scholar activists that directly come from indigenous communities, but also work in establishment academia. So they practically live and connect grassroots academia with establishment academia. Now, just to round up on this, the challenge is how do we, strengthen these relationships and work together in a unified way that maximizes the potential of these efforts. And how do we share resources and support various groups, both from grassroots academia communities as well as establishment academia? How do we better build the kind of relationships that facilitate the coming together of peoples from, particularly scholar activists from grassroots academia spaces and institutions and establishment academia? That is a huge challenge, because at the end of the day, and this is the crux of the matter, decolonization is about power. And let us be very clear, because there's been a lot of misinterpretations of decolonization, and in certain cases, it's just reduced to idle chat and the writing of scholarly articles and publishing them in academic journals and so on. The fundamental necessity for decolonization is disempowered, marginalized, and subjected to horrendous forms of exploitation, to the point that, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic and the situation that has been created, we are threatened with extinction in the real sense. Because the danger of the weaponization of pandemics to serve the eugenics agenda of those who have long sought to wipe out undesirable races and other populations on the planet. There's a real threat now of it being carried out. And amongst, within African groups, out black race from the face of the planet, taking advantage of weakness. That is why a lot of educational work is channeled towards that. But ultimately, there's greater recognition now than ever before that the cracks of decolonization in of their lands and resources, and reorder the relationship so that they can return to a more harmonious, ecologically friendly relationship with Mother Earth. And therefore, all the knowledge production, educational activities should be made to serve purpose. So reducing decolonization to an idle academic chat amongst academics in establishment academic spaces does not serve the purposes of true decolonization. And the challenge is whether progressive scholar activists in establishment academic institutions are prepared to build the kind of relationship with indigenous and other communities of resistance in the colonized parts of the world that will begin to address power in such a way that those communities can begin to use, advance their own work at using knowledge and education to empower themselves and win sovereignty and take control of their lands. And that is where, as XRIs, and we find common cause, with them. Because ultimately, that fight for the global commons is not just a matter of just, creating educational institutions of the global commons. It is also creating a situation where we have a true commonwealth of all that is on planet Earth being retained into the common ownership, actually utilization of all humanity. And that's the best way we can safeguard all life on Earth. So this is what brings Extinction Rebellion into a relationship of resistance with the communities that have been long ago, engaged in rebellion as a way of achieving decolonization. And I think that within that, there's a lot that we can expand
brilliant
upon.
start, Kofi. Fantastic. Okay, so Jerome, follow that, please.
Not an easy job. Well, thank you, Kofi, for the aspirations that we're all seeking here. It really is very important in this time where the world faces, or at least humanity faces, unprecedented challenges in terms of rethinking the sort of mainstream way that we've been engaging with each other and with all the other species that we share this beautiful space with. And it really is a vital moment, because it's very clear, I think, to anyone who looks at the current situation, that there is a profound corruption at the heart of the dominant system. And it's a corruption which, of course, is financial, but it's much deeper than that. It's a corruption of the spirit somehow. It's a corruption of our humanity, a corruption of our care for one another and our care for the other species that we share this place with and that we depend upon, of course. And so when you're in a situation where the dominant discourse of neo-capitalism is so obviously corrupt, how can we step outside that box? How can we start thinking freshly? And this really gets to the profound arguments of those promoting pluriversality as was one of the important strategies. It's about stopping trying to impose one solution that fits all situations, or one approach to education that is the approach, the way that UNICEF go around forcing kids into square rooms to learn from one leader who then puts them competing with one another to see who can get the best marks, who can do the best, who can obey the rules the most effectively. These sorts of modes of education are corrupting people all over the world, regardless of their color, background, previous culture. Once you go into that system, you are, as we all know, you're turned into a particular type of consumer, a particular type of person who is seeking a job, a career, who's not interested necessarily. I certainly notice in the places in Africa I work, once kids have become educated, they're not interested in working on the farm, learning from their elders, practicing the sorts of activities that have sustained their communities for generations. What they want is the quick cash of a job, the quick consumption of all those very desirable items that Western society is so good at making people want. And this really does cause a sort of a mono culture among humanity that is extremely damaging to the world, to the species that we share it with, and to each other. And I think that at a profound sense, this is what our effort to create some sort of experiments at this stage, because of course we don't have a global Academy of the Commons. So we're trying to experiment with different ways of achieving that. And what Radical Anthropology Group has been doing for years, when we have visitors from around the world, we always try and get them to come and talk to us about the things that they find important, that they think are interesting. And that's a very important point of exchange, but of course it's not enough. The times are so dramatic now that we really need to harness the imaginative wisdom that is shared by humanity to the service of resolving this terrible mess that this dominant trope we now call neoliberalism is a suicidal movement to auto-destruction, and it has to stop. And of course, Extinction Rebellion and many other radical groups around the world are trying to find ways to do so. So what I really want to do tonight is just share some of the approaches that we've been experimenting with, so that you can just be aware of different ways that we're trying to achieve this. But before I do that, I just wanted to remind everyone of the profound influence that non-Western thinkers have had on the West and on the evolution of the West. And it really is quite striking The medieval period is sometimes called the Dark Ages, or the period just before the medieval, the Dark Ages. Then this medieval period of fiefdoms, basically mafiosi, groups of men dominating areas of the countryside, calling it their own, imposing their wishes on those people who worked the land, who lived on the land, and somehow being celebrated for that. And this very nasty system, in conjunction with the sort of Christianity as it was understood then, was seeking to really dominate people's lives for and in the interests of an elite few of priests and an elite sort of royalty. And this system was the system that was basically dominating the early colonial period. So you had ideas about a return to some sort of biblical society where the truth of Jesus would be lived by all. The idea of the Renaissance was very much that after the flood we had to reconstitute whatever this idealized Christian world was prior to that time. And of course, this led to appalling injustice, as anybody who voiced opposition to the ideas of the church would be potentially killed, but could easily be ostracized and have all sorts of very terrible things. The witch hunts that we're all familiar with were an epiphenomenon of that. And this was a really dark time for people living in Europe. And in that darkness, some of these elite groups began to move across the world as their traveling technologies improved and mapping and so on started to be developed. And as they encountered other peoples around the world, they had their eyes opened. The people I work with in Congo, they have an expression for this, or du bois miso, you open your eyes when you see new things. And Europeans had their eyes open. So for instance, the current form of the European state, based on sort of effective bureaucracy who are given those powers not because they are the cousins, brothers, sisters of people already in power, but because they have earned some legitimacy to claim rights to be part of the bureaucracy through the skills they have. The idea that a nation is composed of people speaking a similar language, sharing similar culture. These were ideas that were imported from China. They weren't ideas that were present at that time in Europe. And there are, of course, problems with that idea of the state. But in comparison to the way the draconian sort of royal ways that people were living at the time, where status and authority were just, regardless of merit, they were just something that people had because of their background and birth, and they could rule and make laws willy-nilly as they pleased, was something that was very revolutionary for the time in Europe. And Leibniz, who's often given credit for this, borrowed his ideas from the observations of early explorers visiting China. But that was, I mean, just from statecraft, one of the sort of ways that other ideas from other places have been influencing people since a long time. But one of the really profound effects of the invasions of Abiyala, of the Americas, by Europeans, particularly the British and the French, was that they came into contact with the native peoples of those areas who had very different ideas about the sorts of things that Europeans of the time thought made Europe so superior. And they would enter into long dialogues with particularly the Jesuit priests who went there, because they documented these dialogues. And then they shared those dialogues with other people in Europe. And it became a very popular form of literature in the 18th century. And I think about 70 volumes or 70 plus volumes of these different dialogues were very widely distributed around Europe. And they were very popular with European thinking people in Europe, because they challenged so many of the assumptions of this Renaissance order based on the sort of authority of the church and the power of the royal families, very profoundly, to such an extent actually the critiques of, the fact that there were beggars in Europe was something that the peoples of the woodlands of Abiella found absolutely repulsive. And how on earth could you let people suffer with nothing, living in the streets, begging for money? They criticized the judicial system in Europe of the time. Why do you need to punish people by hanging them and putting them in prisons, they asked. What sort of people are you that you need that kind of disciplining? How far have you gone from your shared humanity? They criticized the church. What is it you're trying to say? That you have a monopoly on the divine, that you have a monopoly on understanding ritual? You say you have, but then you're all at each other's throats, killing and castigating one another for your interpretations of this so-called God of yours. Anyway, they came up with endless counter arguments, which people weren't able to voice effectively in Europe because of these terrible hierarchies, but loved to hear. And it stimulated such radical thinking among Europeans that it actually shifted from the era of the Renaissance, this era of trying to impose the authority of the church, to what we now call the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. And it was the profound logic of the reasoning that these indigenous peoples shared with those efforts to convert them that was radically transformative for European society. So I just wanted to remind everybody that these influences have been of extraordinary impact on European society. And in effect, the real savages of this story are, of course, us Europeans, and not the people in these other places. And I think that when you start to understand the profound influence that dialogues with these people had on European society, you start to understand the real truth of the matter. So how can we go about establishing some of those dialogues, and not in an extractivist way that has been going on for so long, where smart asses at universities like me go off to other places in the world and they sit and they research, they talk to people, they write down their ideas, then they bring them back to Europe, and then they peddle those ideas as their own in their careers, their academic careers. And the people who they got those ideas from, well, whatever happens to them, and bad luck. What about if research is part of an ongoing conversation where the foci of your research interests are ones that are developed collaboratively with the people that you work with? What if, rather than it being a one-off dip in, dip out and disappear, it's an ongoing relationship? What if that relationship is productive over the long term, of a whole stream of ideas, of a stream of influences that aren't imperially possessed by the university researcher, but remain solidly acknowledged that they come from these different communities? How would that look? So we did one effort at this, and many people do this. I don't mean to pretend that we're the only people trying this. Many people are, but I just wanted to share, obviously, personal experience as opposed to other people's. So in September, for instance, some of you may have participated in the Flourishing Diversity series, where we invited 30 indigenous people from different parts of the world to come and talk to us about things that they thought were important. And of course, climate, environment, as Kofi mentioned, this ecological crisis, and the terrible impact of our extractivist industries around the world was a major concern of the people we invited. And so they talked to us on a range of issues to try and help Europeans to understand. And of course, this is a very generous act on their part, given the terrible sufferings that all those peoples have received. And they did it without malice, without rage and an attempt to diminish and castigate Europeans. Of course, they had very good reason to, but what was really quite striking was the generosity of spirit that they brought when they came to this dialogue. And they shared with us their understandings of the sacredness of land, of the importance of listening to the intelligence of nature, to tuning in, creating space for ways of listening to nature around us, and understanding ourselves not as apart from that, but as part and parcel of it, and as having a role to play in contributing to it, to enhancing it, to protecting it, to making it even more beautiful than it already is, as opposed to selfishly hoarding it, trying to extract as much wealth from it as we individually can, and then, you know, what is it? I for myself and God for all, as is a proverb goes. And so in the anthropology department at UCL, we've been working on different ways to try and do this. And I want to introduce a couple of students who have been using some or applying some of these methods in their own work. And one of the basis of this work we call the Extreme Citizen Science Research Group. And so what extreme citizen scientists do is we've developed a series of tools that we hope are extremely accessible, that don't bias people who have not been through Western education. Because in fact, the most interesting ideas come from people who haven't been through Western education. Western education is a brainwashing. It's a way of diminishing your imagination as opposed to enhancing and encouraging it. And so many of the really important ideas actually are going to come from non-Western educated people, I feel. So we've developed a set of tools which allow non-Western educated people to apply the principles of knowledge production that we've developed in scientific processes, which is an extremely effective way of producing knowledge, as we all know, particularly in this time of the coronavirus. You know, we all need to turn to the people who have been applying scientific method to understanding disease and illness, and we do so without question, because this method is very robust. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, that's for sure, and the knowledge it produces has yet to be falsified, of course. It doesn't mean it's true just because science thinks it is simply the best knowledge we have available to us, and that's important to remember. It's a work in progress. But how to make those tools available to anybody and allow them to then start generating knowledge which can be compared and challenge the findings from other modes of applying those methods. And that's been a big sort of job we've been doing for about 8-9 years now in the Extreme Citizen Science Group. So we've developed, I mean, as these things are nowadays, apps that you can upload onto a mobile phone that work with pictures as opposed to writing, and which allow people to collect knowledge that they think is important. So both Simon and Carolina, who you're going to hear from very shortly, have been applying this method in negotiating a relationship, a long-term relationship with the groups of people that they work with. And this long-term relationship is one in which the researcher doesn't, you know, ask all the questions, but as you will find out, enters into a very complex set of negotiations with the people they wish to work with. And it's only on those people's terms that they will come in and work. It's not on their terms. And that creates a very different dynamic in the unfolding of their research. So what I'd like to do is introduce Carolina, who has been working in Brazil with a group of people who are very extraordinary in not just their amazing knowledge of human consciousness, of human interrelations with other species and the environment, but also in their approach to problem solving. And maybe towards the end, we can talk about some of that, but they offer us a radical alternative to solving the ecological crisis, which is very poorly understood by people. And one of the great gifts that the Ashaninka have given us is this method. And maybe Carolina will talk about it, or maybe we can talk about it later. Anyway, I'd like to pass over to Carolina. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Jerome. Can you hear me well? Yes, good. Well, good evening, everyone. Here in Brazil is 3 in the afternoon, so I'm still my afternoon. And thank you very much, Chris, Kofi, Jerome. Thank you for the invitation. Even though it was a bit last minute, so I will have to be very spontaneous in this talk. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to such an important issue. And I have some images. I don't know if I'll be able to share my screen. Let me try so that I can share a couple of images. Well, my screen. Let me check. Is it working? Is it working, Chris? Can you see my screen now?
Went to full screen mode.
Perhaps you need to authorize me.
I think
it's working. I think it's just going to take time because there's so many people.
It's working for us.
The morning call was okay.
Sorry, I'm now listening to lots of interference, so it's a bit.
Anything to eat or drink?
Sorry.
No, she had a little bit of water. That was it.
I'm kind of listening to a lot of
I
background
don't even know what
noise.
time
And...
she managed to get out of her bed, out of the chair.
Lunch, tea and bed I did for yesterday. She was brilliant. I think she had a lot of visitors today.
mute all. How do I mute all?
Oh, she get physio. She get physio.
Yeah, is it all frozen?
I can mute all. Okay. Mute all.
Okay, but I just.
And now you muted Carolina as well.
Yeah. Sorry, that was bad.
So I think I will have to stop the share because it's giving a lot of interference.
You know, how all of
Yeah. Okay. So I think let's leave it, but I'm hearing all the background noise again.
So, because
Can I mute all and you unmute yourself, Caroline?
Yeah.
Everyone's muted.
Fine. Okay. I'm sorry, I think it didn't work well because it was like, yeah, I think we better not share. It would be wonderful to share the images, but anyway. Well, so going back to my research, as Jerome presented me, I'm Carolina Comanduli, and I'm about to finish my PhD, really in the final stages of my writing up. And I began my PhD in 2014. And when I went to the UK to begin my PhD, it was funded by the EPSRC, which precisely was funding the Extreme Citizen Science Research Group. And my contribution as an anthropologist was to to test our tools and methodologies on the ground, but having in mind that we had no previous agenda. So we would basically go to the communities and look at the communities and see what they were interested in learning, monitoring from their own perspective. So it was really like an open approach. So in 2014, I spent about 3 months just in a scoping trip in the Amazon, speaking to indigenous peoples and to organizations to understand what were the issues on the ground that could be addressed with these tools. And at this moment, I reached, one of the people I spoke with was an Ashaninka person from this community, which is called Apilcha, and it's on the border between Peru and Brazil in the Amazon. And the Ashaninka people are one of the biggest indigenous populations of lowland Amazonia. There are about 100,000, but most of them in Peru. And I was talking to this community, to a member of this community from Brazil. And I presented the approach and the possibility. And this leader said, yes, you can come to our village to present it to the village. So one of the aspects of the extreme citizen science methodology is to first have a process of free, prior, and informed consent with the community. So at the beginning of 2015, I went to the community and I stayed there for 2 weeks, and I took the opportunity to go to community meetings and explain the approach. And they said yes, and they actually, at that time, they manifested what they were interested in monitoring their land, which was the invasions by illegal loggers, illegal poachers inside their territory. So this was all that I had to start, because so it was a different way of doing research, because often, you know, an anthropologist might know exactly like which people they want to study, where they are, but I didn't know, so I didn't have much time to read anything about the Ashaninka people, and I happened to be there and begin implementing this Excites project. But my project ended up being open-ended, so there was a lot to learn from this relationship. So I did the consultation at the beginning of 2015, January, and they said, yes, you can, yeah, let's do it, and let's develop an application to monitor our territory. So 3 months later, I went back to begin developing this application with them and to begin the training. And as I began it, it was very weird, because I got there and people were very silent. I mean, they would not look at me. They were not interested in me. Basically, that was my feeling. They were just like really attending the sessions for developing the software, developing the applications. But apart from that, there was not much interaction. And I thought, you know, they really didn't care about me. And then I thought, after 2 or 3 months, I thought I better go off and do my field work somewhere else. And and then I just realized later on, I realized that they were just observing me. So they were taking Excites as a way to observe me in the field, to see how I behaved. And then after doing that observation, 2 to 3 months after, they approved a big project for the community with funds from the Amazon Fund, which is a Norwegian, mainly Norwegian fund in Brazil. And then they needed technicians on the ground to help them to implement that big project, which was like a 3-year project working with other communities in the surrounding region. And then finally they invited me to work for them. So that's where, and then I was in a dilemma. Well, what can I do? I mean, I'm here to do my research, and then they want me to work for their association. And then I was in a little bit of a crisis. Spoke with Jerome and all that. And then, yes, that was really the way we began. Well, we continued to collaborate. And then through that, it was not just about working for the association or doing the Excites software development with them, but it was about establishing a relationship of trust with them and learning together. And they were really the ones to lead my research in a way. I mean, they were never interested in my research, like in my questions or in my methodology, but they were the ones like really leading my research and guiding me in terms of what they thought I should know and what I was allowed to know through this relationship. And that was really profound and really intense for me. I ended up staying 2.5 years living with them. And because of my engagement, not just with this project or with the association, but with their life in general, participating in daily life and, you know, and really not pushing things and like asking questionnaires and things which I could see from scratch that was not respectful towards them. We really entered in a relationship, and I learned a lot from them. And through this relationship, I was able to be with them, to travel with them, to participate in meetings, to participate in activities, to support them in many ways that I could with my technical knowledge or with, you know, my non-indigenous knowledge from the city, from, you know, in several levels, not just with the projects. And in that way, I learned a lot myself, and I realized that there is a whole different relationship in terms of also what we understand as trust and what we understand is the right methodology to apply, because we have for example, for them, trust, it was not about what I was saying, like our relationship of trust. It was about observing my actions and seeing who I am, not through what I say I'm going to do, or how intelligent or how clever or how effective, is anything that we present, but it was about really observing my behavior and my actions, and they constantly did it until today, I would say, because we keep on a relationship. And at the same time, as I realized that, for example, questioning or asking questions was not a proper methodology, I just learned how to be in silence and with them, and that was a big opening, because I just realized how powerful silence is, and it really taught me a lot for my life, not just in their relationship, but how much silence can teach a person and can enhance their relationships as well. So I think there has been, so it ended up that, as I said, I stayed for 2.5 years. I collaborated in a number of levels with them. And since I left the field in the mid 2017, I came back to Brazil, like to the southern part of Brazil, and we keep collaborating. So, for example, in Flourishing Diversity, they went to the UK. We have projects together, and now there is COVID, so I'm collaborating in many ways in terms of the communication front and other technological front. So it has been an ongoing relationship, and I think more than anything, instead of myself just going there and extracting knowledge, I learn a lot, and I think they have a lot to teach us. So I think that's a very important aspect, that we have to be humble to learn with them as well. And for example, my thesis, this is another thing I spoke with Jerome, but I want to discuss with them what I should publish of my thesis afterwards, because, I'm talking about their lives. So, and I think, some aspects of it, they might not want to go outside, or might not be strategic at this time, that there is so much threat to indigenous people's rights and to the Amazon and blah, blah. So this is also a part of my own understanding of how we can do things together, because it's not that I'm the owner of their life and their knowledge and their history, even though I talk a lot about it. But I think this is something that should be, the people we study, they should know what we are saying about them and what we're going to do with that knowledge. So I think that's also very important. Do you think I can try once more just to share a couple of pictures? Well, because I think this is the key thing, but the pictures would be just like a
it's just
quick slideshow.
I doubt whether it's going to work. We've got
okay.
We've got a huge number of people, much double what we've got before.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. So yeah.
I don't know what this. Maybe we should keep these smaller or something, or get a more powerful. Maybe I need to get a more powerful broadband or something.
No, this is like my small contribution, and I'm happy to discuss further with the group.
Chris, let Carolina try.
All right, Carolina. Camilla wants you to try. Yes, let's try.
Just once more. Yeah, I can try once more. Sorry. So, just once more. Share.
It says, oh, here we are. Fantastic.
Perfect, Caroline.
All right.
So we see
I'm sharing. Is the picture showing up? Okay. Can you all see?
They're all very small. Yeah.
I'll make it bigger, just so that people can have a feeling. Is it working?
We're getting thumbnails.
Can you see it?
Thumbnails. We see thumbnails.
They're very small. They're very small.
Yeah, so I think, I was doing like full screen here. So if it's small there, perhaps we cannot do any better than that.
If it goes big on your screen, it should be big on our screen. Can't you select a picture? Can you select one of the pictures and pick it up?
We
Exactly.
see all of them, Carolina. We see all of your pictures. So if you click on one, we might see just
Click on one of those pictures.
Okay.
If it's big on your screen, it will be big on our screen.
Like, yeah, it is big on my screen. Is it okay for you now?
Well, no.
No.
On my screen, it's very small. It's thumbnails. I mean, interesting.
Yeah, I'm
That's
sorry.
again,
Oh, yes, I know. Yeah, sorry. So we are learning with Zoom every day, aren't we?
We have it. Brilliant. We can see it.
Can you?
Yes.
I will pass like that so that you can have a feeling of how it looks like. I hope that's yeah. So this is, yeah, that was the map. The red circle is where I was. And this is, you know, places of the village, which is an amazing village surrounded by agroforestry systems planted by them. And the houses have no walls. And this is the satellite training, the software development for monitoring their land. And this is myself going to Paris with Yashaninka to accompany them in the UN meeting. This is the chief making arrows. This is in Paris again, helping them in workshops. This is the kids planting the agroforestry systems. This is me in the class. This is beautiful corn. Yeah, they plant a lot. They are working a lot in reforestation efforts. So that's the river. This is party. Kids, lovely kids. This is doing exchange with other people from the Amazon who visit the village. This is me trying to do something. This is the fish ponds that they have in the village to raise fish so that they don't over harvest in the river. This is collecting leaves, making arrows, beautiful gardens, parties, trainings, weaving. Is it weaving? And then we were traveling to Peru, to sacred sites, in Peruvian Ashaninka sacred sites. And so I was going with them everywhere, up and down, which was a big adventure. Trying to do a questionnaire. And yes, so that you could have a feeling of how it looked like. But yes, that's the village life. Okay. Oh, that's Jerome in the village.
Where?
Can you see it, Jerome?
Yes.
Oh,
okay. That's my father visiting the village. And then we have Jerome once. Oh, yes, the parties, work, exchanges with other indigenous peoples, using maps to understand the territory, drinking party, going to workshops and meetings. And then I think we can finish with Jerome with an arrow. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that. It took so long to fix the technology here.
Good, thank you.
Sorry.
That's lovely. Thank you, Carolina. And it's great that you did sort out the technology, because I think Simon might have a couple of things to show us. Is that right, Simon?
Yes. Let me try and... Can you hear and see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Carolina. Great to see you again. And your photos and your stories are always very inspiring. And Kofi as well. And of course, Jerome. Yeah, it's interesting really that mine and Carolina's case studies are similar in many ways, but also very different in many ways. Sorry, I should say I'm Simon Hoyt. I'm one of Jerome's PhD students as well. I'm in my third year, and I've been working in Cameroon with the Baka, who are a hunter-gatherer group, similar to the Benjele, who Jerome works with in Congo. And I've been working there for about 3.5 years now with the Excite project. And most recently been spending a long time doing ethnography in the forest with the Baka, living with them and trying to understand how they see the forest, as well as trying to implement some of these smartphone tools, which is quite an interesting combination. I've also got a couple of photos or images to illustrate a few points. So hopefully I'll try and share my screen. Let me know how it goes. Oh dear, it's saying I'm going to have to update my preferences, and then in order to do that, I have to quit Zoom and then join again, which doesn't sound very ideal.
Well, I mean, we could perhaps do that. I mean, one of the things to point out is that we are due to stop in half an hour at 8 o'clock. We could probably go on beyond that, but that's a sort of official sort of.
Well, maybe what I could.
So I was thinking we could have a bit of question and answer in the meantime while Simon's uploading his preferences again. Perhaps is that a good idea, Jerome? Just
Yeah, that sounds a very good idea. I mean, there's a very interesting discussion going on in the chat about the nature of education, and one of the, I mean, I think it might be an appropriate moment just to share while Simon's sorting out his thing. This very interesting. So, what do you do when you've got a problem? And I think this applies to the education thing as well as it applies to ecology and how we're going to address future living and so on. So what the Ashaninka really drum home through, and Carolina's work communicates beautifully, is that there is an alternative way to, looking at all the individual issues. So if we think about education, well, right, square rooms are a problem. Teachers forcing students to compete in examinations is a problem, and whatever else. We can go around and we can detail all the specific problems there are, and then we could make little tweaks to try and resolve each of those individual problems. That's the standard sort of European or Western way of addressing problems. The Ashaninka have a very different approach, and I think it's one which is extremely powerful and probably the approach we need to cultivate for our times. So what they say is there are 4 steps to resolving a problem. The first step is know yourself. And that seems self-evident, but of course, knowing yourself is really, actually, if you take it seriously, a very challenging undertaking. And they have ritual and ceremony and different ways of helping each of them members of their community to know themselves. But once you know yourself, once you really understand yourself, then you are in a position to start imagining what would be the ideal situation for that self to be in, say, in relation to education or in relation to the environment. So you start to really cultivate a vision of what that future ideal state would be like. And of course, visions can be productively produced by taking a stroll by the sea or in the nature or whatever it might. There are many ways of doing this. There's no rule. Or dreaming, falling asleep. But the important thing is to cultivate a vision and to hold that vision and to think hard about it, to really invest in it. Don't treat it like a fantasy. Treat it like something very important. And as you cultivate that vision, once it becomes really clear and consolidated in your mind and you understand it, then share it. Share it with those around you. And if they also understand it because you've achieved that degree of clarity in your own mind, then you can start to work out what you need to do, the actions that are required to make that vision a reality. So know yourself. Get a vision, cultivate a vision for that ideal that you are seeking. Once you have that vision, hold the vision, share the vision, stage 3. Once you've shared it, then you have a group of like-minded people who can develop the actions, the steps required to make that vision a reality. And Carolina's work traces that process that the Ashaninka have achieved from really abject situation of misery, as their lands had been devastated by these loggers, poachers, and then cattle ranchers, and their lives too. And then, how they escaped from their history. And the big challenge for European people is how we escape from our history. And the Abiyalan indigenous peoples who so criticized so effectively European practice that it transformed it. I think, people like the Ashaninka are suggesting very strongly that we need to rapidly do the same for ourselves and that is the pathway, the most effective pathway I've come across for doing so. Okay, Simon, sorry to...
Right. That sounds like a great preamble. All right, let me try and share my screen. Yeah, it looks like it should work now. Is that working?
Yeah, we've got all your notes.
Oh dear, better close those quick. Okay. Well, before obviously it's not a long explanation, just 10 minutes or so, but before I get into the project, I wanted to show some of these examples that I've seen in the villages, the Baka villages I'm working in the schools of what I would consider fairly colonial styles of education. And so the key thing to remember here is that I found these pictures in Baka hunter-gatherer schools in the forest. They're a reasonable distance away from the nearest town. Many people in these villages don't speak very, very good French. And of course, everybody in the village is Baka. And I come across these various illustrations that kids have obviously drawn from notebooks and from French school textbooks, that they just copy out these images of white kids with blonde hair coming down a plastic slide, or a little blonde girl talking about her people who don't speak French. It says, "Hello, my name is Emily. We are going to enjoy reading together this story of Clifford, my big red dog." Difficult to imagine the relevance that has for Baka children and the importance that they'll take from that in getting their dinner for the night from the forest or negotiating with their forest spirit the next weekend. But anyway, it's an interesting example of how this colonial education in its glory, really. Let's move on. So this is my main friend, and sort of, I suppose, kind of in a non in a non sort of quinchy way, father in my village, Mangombe, who's the principal healer and also one of the main hunters who hunts with a spear. And he's a really interesting man because he also tells me a lot of things about his impressions of researchers who come into the village where I'm staying with him, NGOs who come in and come out all the time and never leave them with anything but a kind of empty promise. They've told me things about how they're sick and tired of people coming in and out again and again, and they're saying, "Oh, I'll come back. Our project will come back, and we'll develop this idea that we've had together. We'll improve on it." And then they never see anybody come back again. So some villages have said things to me when we're about to leave for the day after having a nice session with the village. Are you coming back? Are you coming back? Please come back to the village, because they're so used to the standard response being to just come in, extract some knowledge, or get the ideas that you're interested in, and then disappear, which is very sad. There's also an interesting example that Mangombe revealed to me, which was a Cameroonian researcher came into this village we're staying in, and the Baka in this village, surprisingly, are not very fond of Cameroonians. That is non-Baka Cameroonians. What they've told me about them is that they come in, they exploit them, they associate them with corruption, whereas when it's white researchers coming in, interestingly, many of these Baka in this village tell me that they're more trustworthy, they live up to their word, but of course they're not necessarily that familiar with the main constructs behind the big issues, which are run by mostly rich white people. But anyway, this interesting Cameroonian researcher came into this village, and he's doing some ethnobotanical research, trying to calculate all the different types of plants that the Baka knew and all the different names of these different plants. And I asked Mangombe after that researcher had left, I said, "What do you think of this guy? You know, when he's in the village, it seems like everybody gets on with him, everybody's laughing and talking to him. But what do you really think?" And he said to me, this man contributes nothing to us. He takes from us and doesn't give anything back. And I thought that was interesting. He is doing an ethnobotanical study, which is trying to benefit this Baka community, as he told it to me, by providing them with a book about all the plants that they know. But the interesting aspect of that is that most of the people in this village are illiterate. so there's no way they could read a book. If he presented it in a perhaps appropriate format of pictures of different plants, that might be useful. And Mangombe said maybe if he gives us this document back, it could be useful. But as far as we see it now, he comes in and he goes out, and he doesn't leave us with anything. But this man himself, when I asked him, said, you know, I'm doing a really great thing for this village. I'm coming in, providing this knowledge, and capturing things for their future generations. But it didn't look the same way through local eyes. So it's interesting seeing the relation between different ways of seeing this. Mangombe also told me, you know, once I open up these issues, he starts talking for hours about all these different problems he has with these issues. He mentioned that especially NGOs who come in and do research, they come and they go, and they come and they go. And sometimes people go back to Yaoundé, the capital of Cameroon, with big salaries, and they buy big houses, and the Baka have to wait around for them to arrive. So he tells me these sorts of things, all these complaints, they're fed up with extractive ideas of research and kind of development agendas, really. So now with some of the work that we're doing, as I say, I've been working in Baka villages in southern Cameroon for about 3.5 years. And what's interesting about this context in relation to Carolina's case study is that I didn't come in and in the first instance, they didn't say to me, what are you doing here? You know, we'll judge whether you should stay here or not, and whether you're useful for us. It's due to this kind of long history in Central Africa of horrendous discrimination, marginalization, and racism against the Baka, both in the sort of local context, as in hunter-gatherers are put on a much lower social and power status than farmers, but also internationally. So when I came in, people would say to me, yes, come in, sit down, you know, and they'll just, one of the difficulties in this context is that people will just accept what you say, is my experience. So from the beginning, you have to be very careful with any ideas that you propose in terms of projects, because people will just say yes. Because, I mean, to put it quite frankly, there's nothing to lose. They've been thrown out of the forest largely in order to make way for logging companies and mining companies and conservation areas which celebrate wildlife rather than people. And as a result of that, they've been launched into this sort of horrendous state of, I suppose, poverty, although I'm very hesitant to use that word always, because they're very wealthy in many other ways culturally. But what it means now is that they're very keen for just any sort of type of development which comes in and tries to work with them in any way, even if it might not necessarily benefit them in the long run or align to their values and ideals. So what we did in the beginning was came in and literally just sat down with people and listened. We didn't say why we were there. We didn't say anything about projects that we had planned, because the projects weren't really planned. That was the main idea, as Carolina talks about. So we sat down and we listened in various communities. And so the projects, I should say, from the beginning was in collaboration with ZSL, which is the Zoological Society of London, which is a conservation NGO, and so of course has a very stated agenda. But given that they're trying to collaborate with Baka communities and trying to, I suppose, build on their indigenous knowledge, it's a good project to try and embrace. So of course, the project is from the start in relation to wildlife crime, poaching, illegal poaching. But in order not to try and force those ideas onto local communities, we sat down and we listened. And in those villages where they shared those same concerns, they would say to us, "We're so angry about these outsiders who come in. They're not from here. They don't know this forest. They come in and they shoot these animals which we rely on, and then they leave, and they pay off people along the way so they can get out. We're fed up with this. We've told people about this in the past, some of the ministry officers, and they don't do anything. They just laugh at us." And in that sort of context, it's a light bulb moment, and we think, yes, this is a perfect collaboration. So from that point, we then start to discuss how the tools that we've made could help them. But the whole process is shaped by their values and their designs, which I'll show you in just a second. So as I say, the most important thing really is for us to adapt, not for them to adapt to us. we go in and we adjust to what their values are, and then the project is led by those. An interesting aspect of what you can see here is sitting down in a meeting with one of my colleagues from ZSL, Simi and Ayebe. When we're asking the communities about different questions, whether they'd like to be involved in the project after they've expressed interest, or how they'd like to manage it in certain ways, these are egalitarian communities, or at least in some form egalitarian, even if unfortunately some of those culture elements fading away. It's not the same as some of the farming communities where we would go in and ask project questions, and the chief or the notables would say, yes, we want to do it like this, and everybody else wouldn't have a word. They would make the decisions for everybody. In these Baka villages, it was much more, they decided together, and it took time. Everybody had their say. Women would come in, men would come in. It would take time, and so we couldn't just sit there and hope for an answer. So often we would explain and we discuss what the project could do and what their concerns were around that forest area, and then we would leave it for an hour or two, and people would go off and discuss it together, and then we'd come back, even a day or two or a week later. So the important thing there was adapting to their way of making decisions. Here's another photo of Jerome in the field. This was a period of what Carolina describes FPIC, free, prior and informed consent, which is the kind of standard, or should be at least the standard mechanism of engaging with indigenous communities through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So everybody who works with indigenous people, or any communities really, should follow FPIC, but of course many don't, and they just treat it as a box ticking exercise. But in any case, hopefully we take it seriously, and it involves explaining the potential benefits of projects that we could do together, but also the potential difficulties. For example, in this project with illegal wildlife crime, of course, there's a high risk of being involved. If neighboring villages find out that you're monitoring the forest and you're at the bottom of the social hierarchy, it might not fare well. So it's very important that issues of security, issues of potential conflicts come up before any involvement in the project or any data is taken. So that takes a long time, and it's ongoing. It's always ongoing. And we're still going on today, 3.5 years later. So it's important that it remains open, because the project changed and things change over the course. With regards to the Excite projects that we're doing, the app we've made is called Sapeli, which is, Carolina mentioned, it's a smartphone kind of tool, but really it's just an empty blueprint of an app. And every village designs their own projects alongside the researchers, or preferably independently if they can, and then design icons and upload it into the app. So they can press on different icons for different things that they want to take data about. In this case, we're talking about illegal wildlife crime. This village decided they wanted to monitor killed animals that they see in the forest, which poachers have abandoned or potentially got shot and then ran off. And I asked them, which picture would you like to represent this? And they said, and people started running up to me and started drawing in my book. But then after a minute or two, people became quite sort of unsatisfied with that, and they said, actually, do you mind if we draw on the floor? We're much more used to that. And of course, yes. So after that, 3 or 4 guys came forward and started drawing all these icons on the floor with sticks. And the process then was just to take a photo of the icon which was most agreed upon by all the community, and then develop it into an icon, which you can see in the bottom right here, which they call Bemba, which is a small type of antelope which occurs in quite high numbers in this area. And so they design all of these icons themselves if they'd like to, and that creates an app or a local form of monitoring, which is completely understandable by local people, and also develops a high sense of ownership. They really feel like it's theirs because they've designed all the elements to it. This is another quick example of another village, which is Bine, which Martin Craddock, who I think has done a HERD talk quite a while ago, who's started an organization called Global Music Exchange, who have recorded and developed a lot of Baka music. You can buy it online. Anyway, this is a village, this is that same village, and we've designed another app there, And all of these icons are designed by the Baka community in that village. And when you allow the communities to really come up with these ideas themselves with no restraints, all these interesting ideas start coming. As Jerome says, it can start leading the way to creating solutions to real local issues. Some of these icons, the bottom right one there is Ngolo Golo, which is a local type of alcohol, which is very strong and brewed by Bantu people to try and keep the Baka addicted to horrendous working schedules and farming without any sort of reward except this alcohol. So they decided they wanted to map these alcohol brewing sites, which of course researchers coming in would have never thought of as an important issue necessarily. The bottom left one there is monitoring births and deaths in the village, which also I had no idea was important, but actually in order to get citizenship and these sorts of things with the local ministry, they need to have this sort of data. So alongside monitoring fishing points and abuse by eco guards, they've got these very personal local issues included in the app, which is great. So alongside all this sort of excites work, the final thing I wanted to say is that in my last few weeks in the village, I've been talking quite a lot to this woman in the middle who's, I don't know her real name, but everybody calls her Kobo Wose, which is woman elder, or kind of the woman leader. And after talking to her in her house for a few hours, she said to me, oh, I'm so angry and worried about the children not having any sort of forest knowledge anymore. When we were kids, all our parents would show us around the forest and point out tracks of porcupines and calls of monkeys and which plants we could use to treat different wounds and these things. But now none of my children know these things anymore. And we discussed about why this is happening and the influence of being removed from the forest and all these sorts of things. And so together we came up with an idea of having Sikolo Nabele, or forest schools, where all the village comes together on a certain day of the week, whichever day they feel like, and led by these elders, such as Kobowose, we all came together and walked down about an hour into the forest, and every few minutes, I couldn't believe it, so often, every few minutes, the elders would point out a different type of medicinal plant, a different a footprint of a different type of animal, a little kind of section of water where the women would show the kids how to trap fish, which is a very important subsistence method for women who go on this particular type of fishing called nguma. And it was literally every few minutes. The knowledge was clearly very, very much still evident in the elders, at least. And the kids were fascinated. You know, they were looking in, thinking, "Wow, you know, look at all these things that the forest offers us," which they would otherwise not get from these pictures of drawing white people going down slides. So well, the nice thing about this, I think, in this current context of this conversation, is that through long-term ethnography, through living with this village, this is how this form of forest school emerged. It wasn't anybody coming in from outside, including myself, and suggesting this as an idea, even though it could be a good one to suggest. It was completely organic. It came from conversations with Kobowose and other elders in the village, and together coming up with this idea of how the kids could get this knowledge back again. And so, as Kofi and Jerome have said, having these sorts of ways of indigenous initiatives leading the way, coming to the forefront, rather than sticking to a strict kind of schedule or mechanism of what education should be by outsiders, is much more locally appropriate, and it inspires much more creative thinking, or other ways of thinking which might be more positive than the repetitive ideas of sort of capitalistic gain and separation between nature and culture, which we're all very much used to in our forms of education. All right, I think I'll leave it there. Try and stop share that.
Thank you, Simon. That was a very interesting example of an alternative schooling. My suggestion is we just open to questions now, as people would like. There's some great stuff going on in the chat, but maybe we can bring that into the discussion. Can I suggest, Chris, you chair the discussion?
Okay. So can we have, I mean, what do we want to do? Do we want to have a sort of kind of emphasis on not talking for too long? Maybe 3 minutes or so, perhaps, at the maximum. And Yeah, so we get as many people in as possible. So there must be lots and lots of questions. Who wants to start off? All comments, of course.
I mean, it's racing along on the chat. I think everyone who's wanting to ask questions is busy in the chat. The chat's great. I'm also contributing here.
Give us a summary of the chat.
So, I mean, the questions that are coming up, and I haven't been able to read them all just yet, are really around the nature of education as it's practiced in the West, and how that's then exported elsewhere around the world, and what constitutes the core knowledge that we do need. And there are clearly some things like reading and writing, basic arithmetic, that everybody can benefit from. But beyond that, shouldn't we base, and one of the suggestions that I think is great is that it should be based on free prior informed consent. You know, tell kids, well, what is it you'd like to know? Give them experiences which cultivate a better understanding of themselves. And through those experiences, they can then determine what they would need and like to learn. You know, where teachers, rather than dictators, become facilitators. You know, that school becomes a facilitation for your own blossoming and flourishing, as opposed to a molding, a character formation, you know, a creation of another consumer. How can these things be organized? And I don't want to dominate too much. I think I'll stop and let other people ask questions. Hopefully they can. It's just racing along there.
Well, can I raise a question?
Of course you can, yeah.
I think that what Jerome Chris Radical Anthropology Group, through the projects like the Extreme, you know, Science are doing. This is fascinating, but it is still not the norm. You know, even UCL, right? If somebody went to UCL and how UCL promotes itself, you wouldn't even know these kind of things are happening. Yeah. And so, you know, we have this, you know, picture of the extractivist form of miseducation that continues to do terrible harm. And in the case of these communities, we have to reckon with the current persistence of coloniality in the form of neocolonialism, which is actually violence still being perpetrated. These communities are very, very marginalized. You know, they cannot even impact on how power is exercised in the areas in which they live. And they literally live at the mercy of this colossal machine of destruction of the environment and perpetration of ecocide, which in the current situation is actually threatening their very existence, the very existence of all these communities. And literally they appear to be powerless to do anything about it. In the current situation, many are waiting, you know, and if, you know, this COVID-19 is not checked, it will wipe out huge numbers of people, even those who are you are engaged in developing these things. So there is an urgency to begin to find ways of how do we bring this existing efforts, communities, and what you're doing into the mainstream, for at least that to register on the system of education that currently exists. And how we can do that should be the question we should be addressing as a matter of urgency.
Can I just say we need to go up as well as down? I mean, we need to do everything sort of simultaneously. And I just wanted to just point out that, I mean, you're right, Kofi, not many people do know what Jerome and others of us have been doing, but a major, I think, a major sort of, well, a bit of a breakthrough was when Jerome got his article published in the Scientific American. You cannot get more prestigious, I don't think, for anthropology than getting an article in the Scientific American. And it's a magnificent article, and it kind of brings everything together. The understanding of indigenous, wealth of knowledge, together with our own need to link up with those other voices, give them the lead, and take action. So I'm just saying, it seems to me so important that we don't forget one or other of those two poles. I mean, the Scientific American is a journal of science. If it wasn't for science, we wouldn't even know that driving a car or even burning a few logs produces carbon dioxide, which then accumulates and actually leads to the greenhouse effect. So I'm just saying, I know you know this and agree with us on that one, Kofi. It seems to be so important not to go down a kind of populist road. I mean, this right-wing populism means tell the people what they want to know, and that's not always good. If you're a scientist, you need to say, you in the interest of health, you need to know a few things which have been worked out by people across decades, centuries, doing testing right across the entire planet. And I've always thought that actually science has never been an exclusively Western or even primarily Western form of knowledge. Science just means asking a fundamental question: do you see what I see? Is what I'm seeing just me or my little group, my sort of egocentric perspective, or can we check this knowledge out with others and others and others? And the wider you go across the planet in seeing and asking that question, do you see what I see? When there's a collective across the planet which comes to a similar conclusion, it's much more likely to be correct than when a particular nationalistic, little section of society, white people or British people or whatever it is, or people around Donald Trump, they can agree on things, but there comes a point where it's complete nonsense. So I think we need to be, and I'm sure everyone agrees with me, we need to keep in mind that it's almost like the one thing which humans have always managed to do is to actually check things out with each other, this collectivist approach to knowledge. And so, I mean, science is the one genuinely internationalist, genuinely accountable, genuinely collectivist in principle. Obviously, as Jerome said, very often it's none of those things. It's not internationalist at all. It's subservient to politicians. But in principle, insofar as it is science, it's got exactly those same values that egalitarian hunter-gatherers have. You don't just throw your weight around. You don't say, I'm a big guy, therefore my theory is right. Everyone, as soon as you come up with a theory, everyone's trying to level you down, test it out. There's something marvelous, in principle, at any rate, about the methodology of science. And I don't think I'm having to plead against this group here on that one, but it's important, I think, to remember. And just to say, I think Jerome's breakthrough with the Scientific American may be a small step towards getting at least this wretched institution, UCL, recognized for some of the most valuable work it actually does do.
Well, I mean, Kofi's point about these experiments being more or less unknown is very important. And because I'm involved in this world, there are an awful lot of people doing some really interesting work, collaborative explorations with a range of different indigenous groups around the world. And some of the results, is particularly in environmental management, are dramatically impressive. I mean, they really are the path for a future where we can all flourish together. And the importance, I mean, inform yourselves, look at citizen science is actually a very expanding and an important initiative that's being carried out around the world. And it really does offer hope for future. These small experiments, while seeming insignificant now, can, if the broader conditions change, as they always do, suddenly become catapulted forwards in ways that can be quite unexpected to us. And so the really important thing is to start to become aware of these alternatives. In the discussion, people are already talking about, audio book libraries available free, different styles of schooling that we know about in the UK and so on, that experiment with some of the ideas we've just been discussing. Now, while these are marginal at the moment, and the one thing that I think COVID teaches us is the status quo is very fragile, much more fragile than we might have thought when you're completely engaged in it. And it's that fragility which is the crack which we need to keep opening up And we need to be prepared, ready with the alternatives. If we haven't experimented with these different ways of doing things, then we don't have really effective voices in trying to determine what that new normal might look like. The old normal is over. What is that new normal going to start to be? And this is where there's a really vital role each of us need to play. It's not any individual, it's not any one solution that's going to give the solution. It's many individuals coming together, promoting a range of different solutions, and then people experimenting with those, seeing what works for them in their context, in their situation. And then we may actually completely transform the system. And of course, that is what is needed, a complete transformation of the system. And that's really where the hope lies for the future.
I'm sorry, I think, Chris, you completely misunderstood the point that I made, right? My point is not about what is science and what is not science. My point is about when will all of this work, you know, have a cumulative effect of effecting system change, right? And that is my point. You know, definitely within indigenous communities, that their knowledge production and work is very, very scientific.
Yeah.
You know, and scientific work is also done in, you know, educational institutions of type of UCL. And of course, you can have people who research, you know, in indigenous communities and publish in some of the so-called prestigious journals of the world, which, by the way, these indigenous communities can read, right? And the mere publication of those articles in those places might promote the careers of, you know, academics in these, you know, kind of established institutions, but they do nothing for those communities. And where we are in this world of today, the challenge is to, will these indigenous communities that are being threatened very seriously, those that we have around, a lot have already been disappeared in history through colonial, you know, conquest and the genocide and ecocide that has happened already. But those who are remaining today in a situation where pandemics, because of, you know, the way society, you know, is organized in the world today, these pandemics are threatening the remaining numbers of indigenous communities that you are working with through this kind of extreme side. To what extent, when can we hope that the combined effect of these indigenous communities across, particularly the global south, and then those scholar activists who are working with them will effect system change for us to get a better world? Because as Extinction Rebellion, that is the crux of the matter. It's not about just publishing articles. It's not just even about, you know, having correct engagements with them. It's about, can we effect real change?
Kofi, I wasn't even attacking you. I completely 100% agree with you.
I'm not saying you were, but I'm just saying I wanted to correct.
No, I wasn't. I
wanted to correct the emphasis of my
question. Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I guess it's all about what Jerome is talking about, tools, and the tool is here, the triangle of scientists, activists, and the indigenous people. And the center is the indigenous people. That is the tool. That is the you know, the triangle that you're working with right now. And the pathway is also created by a mindset shift now because of COVID-19. Children's minds are changing because they haven't been in school, you know. So it's a little bit like that Pink Floyd song, Another Brick in the Wall. That brick is out of the wall now, and you know, that is the part of the foundation of the pathway. So the listening to the indigenous people is the most important thing, because their voice needs to be heard here in the street and by leaders. So I mean, by the time that teenage activists are adults ready to become politicians, yeah, there needs to be a tool ready-made so that the indigenous voices will be heard here, and new leaders, or whatever you want to call them, politicians or whatever, you know, they can hear those voices if they need to get some advice about direction and vision.
Can I just say, I just wanted to just provide people with a tiny little bit of good news at one particular level, which is that the normal censorship imposed by these, you know, prestigious mainstream elitist journals, that censorship has been to a very small extent blown apart, in my view, at least where UCL is concerned. I'm just saying, although indirectly, I think my own view is that Jerome's allowed indigenous voices, particularly from, you know, from the Bayaka, some kind of element of that collective voice to break through the censorship. That can only be good. I'm not even the slightest bit arguing against you, Kofi, that the important thing is that indigenous people themselves feel empowered, get empowered, give the leadership, and that as a movement, we begin to take power in a way which is actually led by indigenous voices. All I'm saying is that you don't even I know you don't disagree with that, Kofi. One of the reasons is precisely because UCL is a rather prestigious institution, and it needs turning upside down. And there's a very small degree, some of that turning the world upside down, even within this institution, a UCL, where we're kind of in rather virtual sense inside it. To some extent, we're making some headway, and that I'm just giving a little bit of good news. That's all.
Can I invite Toyin to contribute?
Yeah, of course.
Hi, Jerome. There's a really famous quote. Everyone who knows me knows I'm pretty much a sci-fi nerd. Arthur C. Clarke makes that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and it's a really good quote. And sometimes what we forget in academia is that it actually goes the other way around as well. So some things that are perceived as magic are actually very advanced technologies, and they might be rooted in the economic, or not the economic, in the ecological system. And so we might not be able to perceive what I'm talking about, kind of like sometimes we talk about herbs when it comes to medicinal practices, etc., different methods of pedagogy, and we saw that in some of the presentations today. And I think that if we're talking about a decolonizing form of education, it's really, really important that we're actually prepared to be humble enough, prepared to actually just kind of step back and say that we don't know best. I understand what Chris is saying about Jerome's opening up the gateways of the journals and these prestigious journals. I mean, sometimes we have to question even the legacy, that prestigiousness, what does it come from? I mean, COVID-19 has actually shone a spotlight on what's happening in the world, on a different way to look at the way people are actually vulnerable to this virus. So before, people were talking about racism and genetics, but this is actually a time, if we really are academics, if we really are just in science, to talk about epigenetics, because now we have evidence for the first time, because people are dying, but actually it's not just genetic changes, it's actually the social environment, the social cultural impact of what people live under. That's because of their genetics that's causing these problems. I don't hear anyone in academia talking about this. I hear we talking about structural racism to one degree, but I don't hear us talking about those issues in this world. And my fear is that Jerome's right. There is no normal that's being reimagined. And I think it's our responsibility to be involved in the discussion. It's our responsibility. Can you not hear me?
It's breaking up. We need to do something. I mean,
I don't know. I don't know what I can say. Is it not?
No, it's not you. We need a few people to turn off their screen or something. I think. Apparently, I'm not allowed to turn mine off. I've tried for 3 times. I can't do it.
Maybe repeat the last minute of your talk.
Yeah. Go on, Toyin. Yeah.
I don't know where I lost. All I'm saying is that those of us that are interested in principles of decolonizing education, of looking at making a change, we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility to rethink the way that education research is actually conducted right now. So if the world is talking
I don't know.
I'll leave it at that.
I think we need to. I'm going to ask Jerome, because I know Jerome wanted to come in, and maybe we can hear Jerome. For some reason we can't hear you, Toyin. So thanks for switching off. Jerome, did you have something more you wanted to say?
I just wanted to get Toyin to share his views because I could see he was making some very lively commentary on the chat. The other people I'd like to invite for a little comment perhaps is Robin and Alendra. Are you, you've also been making some very powerful comments. It would be lovely to hear a bit from you.
Wow, throw us on the spot. Thanks, Jerome. Also, please everyone download my audiobooks because I'm just pirating loads at the moment because I don't. Feels like a good thing to do. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask, the question I had was this conversation about. It feels like we don't often talk enough about like how trying to include all of these other forms of knowledge and understanding into our English language and using the English language to say, like, for example, school. Actually, no, the way the Baka are educating their children, you know, that is a form of schooling. And actually is like, is it a form of schooling or is schooling, you know, the word created in Europe to define our form of education inherently shaped towards that, what that is? And can we ever include enough alternatives from the margin to change the mainstream of what that word means? Or is it actually about also thinking about the necessity to bring other words into these conversations? And instead of co-opting almost those words into the English-based conversations that we're having, using the words of the indigenous communities or using the words that communities use around the world and trying to break beyond that kind of hegemony of the words like education, you know, or the words like school, which are English words, came from a specific place and mean a specific mainstream thing. Yeah, I mean, that's my question, is like, you know, does by necessity our use of English and other languages need to evolve through this process from universality to pluriversality as we break that kind of such a dominant knowledge form, which is what the English language effectively is encapsulating currently in global academia? Does that make sense?
I think that makes very good sense. I always imagine, you know, the ideal for me schooling would not be called school, it'd be called flowering or something like that. You know, how can you nurture each individual so they flower into their strength, their power, their specialness? And if we could do that without diktat, without structure and order, or at least with some sort of superstructure that would create the conditions for that to happen without being dogmatic about it, that would be a beautiful dream.
I mean, school in this country is clearly a kind of initiation rite, taking many, many years. And the whole point of it is to make sure that the kids don't ask too many questions. There's a reason why, for example, anthropology isn't part of the school curriculum. It's because the schooling is an initiation right into this particular culture. So as long as you can read enough to pay your bills and pay the rent and, you know, get, you know, all the various things that the system wants you to do, you're kind of educated. Intrinsically, anthropology is subversive for the reasons we all know, because of course you hear completely different voices. But
Elena.
Yeah. Elena, yes.
Yeah, just thank you very much for the comment of the English word. Just to give you one small example, vedenie means to know. Vedec is the scientific person, and ved is the old Slavonic word for the one who knew, who had the ultimate, not ultimate, but who had the wisdom. So it meant exactly the first point you mentioned, Jerome. First, to know yourself, cultivating the vision, and then trying to join the others. So I think in the other layers of language, there is no such thing as external schooling or importing some kind of external hierarchies, rather knowing and getting in touch with the space of vedenie, ved, science. Veda is science. Thanks.
Yeah, just wanted to say that Helenka is going to be giving a talk in, what is it, June the 2nd, I think, Tuesday, June the 2nd, on anthropology as necessary unlearning. She's written lots of publications in Slovakia on these topics.
Or rather about space for interpretation, not just on asylum courts, but how does it all links up to create a space for listening of each other?
Yeah.
And how much does it link with unlearning? Thanks.
How long does everyone think we need to go on for? It's I find these.
May I say something, Chris?
Yes, of course you can. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like I'm very glad with the discussion today, and I think we opened up like a huge field of discussion, because we are both at the same time making a criticism to our own system, but also thinking about, you know, whatever, not the right term, but the schooling system for traditional knowledge and so on. So what I observe here in Brazil in terms of the, not in the village where I was, where they actually are turning the school to their own needs in a very reflexive way and decolonizing way, which is another topic very important, which would be good to share how the Ashaninka are doing it. But in most of the villages, the schooling system arrives as it arrives in Simon's case, with, you know, all of these conceptions and making the kids sit down for many hours a day in a room, while their life, you know, their life depend on the life outside the schoolroom. And then they lose all the knowledge that is around them about the forest, about their territory, about how to survive from that. So we are promoting this detachment. So I think, you know, it's really important to encourage this traditional knowledge to flourish, but we don't, you know, I don't think we need to do much for that to flourish. We just need to interfere less. That's my feeling. So we're not going to bring the solution for the traditional knowledge systems to come back again. We just need to allow them to have time to do that. Because, and in terms of our own system, what I think is that, you know, I have a lot of criticism to our own, you know, scientific system. And I think we lose too much time. I mean, we just have limited amount of energy, but we just lose too much time thinking, and we don't have much time to act. So what's the point in like having lots of knowledge if that has no application? I mean, I'm saying, I know I'm being very hard in my criticism, but I just think that, you know, kids don't need to be sitting down for so many hours at school, even in our own society, much less in the forest, because they have, but you know, the thing is that about indigenous knowledge is directly connected to practice, and we are very little connected to practice. So how can we begin, you know, getting all this great knowledge we produce into practice, you know, without having endless tests and conversations? So of course, we live in an environment which is detached from, you know, we don't provide for ourselves. We make money and then we buy food. So it all gives us more time to think more. But then where is action? Where is transformation? So that's,
thank you.
So I think it's a huge debate. We can go on for ages here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carolina.
Well, that sounds like a good place to call the day. I think probably it's better when these recordings aren't too long, because people will actually watch them. And if we keep going, I think that was a lovely point to finish with.
Yes, thank you very much, Carolina. Yes. Okay, everybody, in that case, wonderful, and see you next week.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Kofi, Chris, Carolina, Simon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Alejandra.
Now let's burn all the schools down.
Lovely.
Nice to see you.
Okay.
Now